Thank you again for that introduction. And it really is an absolute privilege and an honor for me to speak with you today. In fact, given the true luminaries and thought leaders that have spoken at this fascinating conference, I'm both humbled and a bit intimidated, frankly, to offer a few lay perspectives from a corporate general counsel to this distinguished audience. You know, what brings me to risk total embarrassment in accepting this invitation to speak today? Two things. First, I can think of few more important public policy challenges facing our society today than issues surrounding artificial intelligence, ethics, legal systems and functions, human rights and democracy, and the rule of law. For reasons that I'll mention in a moment, now is precisely the time to gather, to debate, and act upon ways to ensure that artificial intelligence is used in ethical ways and for the betterment of society. The second reason I decided to accept this invitation, despite not being an expert in the area, is autobiographical. It turns out over 35 years ago, when I was a first-year law student, I was a research assistant for a lawyer in Silicon Valley who was a pioneer in the field of computers and the law. Only a few of you may know or remember Susan Nickham, but I had the privilege of researching and writing an article with her back in 1985 on, of all things, artificial intelligence and the law. I'm not sure that article even exists online anymore, but that research and writing project was a formative experience for me, and it helped launch me into a career that has allowed me to pursue my interest in issues at the intersection of law, science, technology, and policy. Fast forward over 3 decades to today, artificial intelligence is not only pervasive in our daily life, it's becoming increasingly so. And I don't mean just music or movie selection algorithms or the use of online shopping bots. As we've heard in this conference, the use and sophistication of AI tools, machine learning, and big data in areas as varied as transportation, medicine and healthcare, financial services, education, access to justice, urban planning, and manufacturing is increasing by leaps and bounds. And the ability of AI tools now to learn and continuously improve as they gain experience with and process more and more data is truly impressive. And more than just their ubiquity is the fact that more and more decisions of consequence are now being made with the assistance of AI tools. You've heard just now and earlier at this conference about the use of AI to help judges sentence criminal defendants. It's but a short leap from that to the use of AI to help judges in other areas in which they administer our judicial system. So how should we think about AI and the rule of law? I'd like to offer 3 comments that but scratch the surface of this important and complex set of topics. With the genuine experts we have in the audience, I hardly want to elevate these 3 comments into anything I would call principles, and they certainly don't rise to the level of Isaac Asimov's famous 3 laws of robotics, which is what I grew up with when I discovered science fiction in middle and high school. Instead, I offer these thoughts with great humility as part of the broader interdisciplinary dialogue that's the hallmark of this conference. My first comment has to do with the regulation and governance of AI. And it starts with the article that I co-authored with Susan Nickham years ago when I was a first-year law student. The question we addressed is, what legal liability should attach to harms caused by AI machines or algorithms? And the principle we articulated then, and which I think is still relevant today, is that we should apply the traditional rules of legal liability, assessing, for example, whether the conduct was negligent, reckless, or intentional, and then tracing the chain of causation to a human actor or actors. In other words, don't blame the machine. I think this is an important point because as AI tools and algorithms become more and more complex and sophisticated, it becomes easier and more natural to fall into the trap of blaming the tools or the algorithms for the harms that they cause. This tendency to want to blame the machine is related to the pervasive nature of AI, because we know that certain new technologies create new and unusual risks. But as the use of AI becomes more normalized and a part of daily life, we don't think as much about the power that it has. Indeed, the unexamined and even unthinking reliance we may place on decisions on the basis of AI tools can lull us into a sense of complacency. It reminds me of the Ernest Hemingway quote about how one goes bankrupt. 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. I hope we don't have to experience some mass tragedy as a sudden wake-up call for greater government or regulatory intervention, but relatively small events with proper attention in the right places can lead to developments in the law that can help us move up and forward in the learning curve. After all, tracing the line of liability to a human actor or actors not only helps ensure that accountability falls on someone who can be held morally responsible, but it also drives a feedback loop that helps incentivize design or other changes that help prevent future harms and mitigate future risks. As a corporate general counsel, I know firsthand that the negligence standard, imposing liability on people or entities that make or sell products that unreasonably cause injury, can have salutary public policy benefits if applied in the right way. And for responsible companies, it shouldn't be a heavy burden to ensure that the innovative products they make and the services they provide are safe and effective for their intended purposes. And that leads me to my second point. Transparency is a key driver of accountability. And for AI, I believe that transparency means at least 3 things. First, disclosure of the algorithms or the actual code, at least at some level, allows the public and regulators to better understand how the AI tool works and the extent to which there may be intentional or unintentional biases built into the algorithm. Now, I know that AI developers will be concerned about protecting their intellectual property and trade secrets, but too much of a black box or trust me approach will ultimately erode the confidence that is necessary for these tools to grow and flourish. Second, and speaking of black boxes, AI tools should have the equivalent of a flight data recorder to ensure that logs of the inputs considered and the outputs rendered are retained and can be examined and studied by independent third parties. Again, this is a basic public safety practice that is well accepted and even mandated in other areas of life. And third, as with medical devices and pharmaceutical products, manufacturers and providers should be required to report adverse events so that we can learn from and make improvements to minimize those harms. I offer these thoughts not because they are necessarily the complete answer to appropriate governance and regulation, but because all of you have thought more deeply about these issues than I have. And I wanted to make sure that you know that the private sector is not only interested in having, but should continue to have a seat at the table in the constructive process of identifying and implementing appropriate policy solutions. My final comment is in the nature of a challenge. It starts with the observation that AI is very good at repetitive, data-intensive tasks within a defined domain. In other words, AI technology will get to, and may have already gotten to, the point where its IQ rivals, and indeed may have already surpassed in many respects that of human experts. The corollary to that point, however, is that humans still have an edge when it comes to EQ. It is, I believe, the marriage of AI and human judgment that is, and for the foreseeable future will remain, the winning combination. The challenge, of course, is how we ensure that human judgment, including and especially human values such as grace, generosity, compassion, empathy, courage, and integrity, continue to play a meaningful role in important decisions we make as individuals and as a society. That doesn't mean teaching machines how to have grace, compassion, courage, and the like. For even if it were possible to do so, and even if human judgment were to be shown to lead to inferior outcomes or more, quote, erroneous, unquote, decisions, however that's defined, I am simply wary of turning over important human decisions entirely to AI algorithms. Perhaps it is too late for that, but I don't think so. Conferences such as these give me reason for hope and optimism that we will be able to protect and advance human rights, innovation, and the democratic order through international dialogue, cooperation, and action. The proliferation, for example, of new academic programs in areas such as the design of ethical AI systems strongly suggests to me that our best minds and the next generation of innovators and policymakers are at least aware of and starting to think more deeply about the risks and pitfalls of mechanical reliance on AI algorithms. So my call to action for all of you is therefore to continue the dialogue and the hard work of forging technology, legal, and policy solutions to advance the societal benefits of AI, of which there are many, while mitigating the social risks and harms, of which there are also many. So in sum, don't blame the machine. Transparency drives accountability. Keep human judgment, but pair it with AI to get IQ plus EQ, and continue the dialogue and the good work you're doing here. This is a collective effort that requires, above all, leadership. And there's no better group, I submit, than this one to lead that effort. Thank you very much.